Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, EJ Antoni, the economist from the Heritage Foundation and the in-house economist for this fine program, will join us and talk about the pending Longshoreman strike as ports all up and down the East Coast could be shutting down this week. It's a huge deal. Could impact the entire economy. EJ will talk about the effects. Sean Logue is with us at 5 o'clock from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was outside Primanti Brothers. That's that restaurant that turned J.D. Vance and his supporters away this weekend. What was that all about? Sean will tell us. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Boy, oh boy. Let's see. Coringe spoke today. She did a press conference and leave it to Peter Doocy to ask some of the best questions as usual. Peter Doocy pointed out just a short while ago that this weekend both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were doing anything but being focused on the people of the country who were being devastated by Hurricane Heline. And here's how that exchange went. Take a listen to this.
On Heline, people in Western North Carolina.
Oh, stand by. One more time. Let's try this.
On Heline, people in Western North Carolina were drowning in their houses this weekend. Others were losing everything. President Biden was at his beach house, and Vice President Harris was hosting political fundraisers on the West Coast. Is there a reason that they could not be here?
The president did exactly what a president in this moment needs to do, which is directing his team to take action.
Somebody else needs to do this. He delegated. He's fine. He was on the beach. He needed to grab a big slice and an ice cream. He delegated this one.
One of the reasons that the FEMA administrator was here in this room on Thursday is the president wanted to make sure that we were sending a message out to folks who were going to be impacted by the hurricane.
Yeah, this is totally unsatisfactory. There's a number of things that have happened in the midst of all of the chaos. Did you see that there were 8 men who have been arrested for looting in Washington County, Tennessee? 8 men. This is in the midst of the storm damage in Tennessee. WCYB, local news outlet, saying 8 men have been arrested for allegedly looting flood-ravaged communities in the Highway 107 area of Washington County, Tennessee. According to the sheriff, Keith Sexton, the Washington County Sheriff's Office says deputies continue to patrol the region, especially along the flood zone. According to the sheriff, deputies arrested 8 men on Saturday for looting. Authorities say each of the 8 men arrested are being held at the Washington County Detention Center on $20,000 bond. We have new information at this hour about those men. They range in ages from 24 to 51 years old, all of them with Hispanic last names. And Allie Bradley at News Nation now confirms this hour that DHS has confirmed to her that all 8 of these men are gotaways. They are illegal aliens in the country who are robbing Americans in the midst of a natural disaster. That's what all the authorities are saying. According to Washington County Sheriff Keith Sexton, deputies arrested these 8 men for looting. All are now in custody at the Washington County Detention Center. Court appearances scheduled for today. They're all charged with aggravated burglary for breaking into occupied structures. And now DHS sources are saying these 8 men are gotaways. Gotaways. So the chaos of our open border, thank you, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, continues. Speaking of that issue, over the weekend, the left sought to downplay, cover up, or excuse, one of the three, or some combination thereof, the fact that the ICE director on Friday notified Congress that there are over 13,000 convicted murderers who are currently being tracked by ICE who are not detained inside of the United States. 13,000 convicted murderers among the foreign nationals that ICE is aware of who are in the United States of America right now. An additional 16,000 are sexual assailants, not alleged, convicted sexual assailants, foreign nationals who are in the United States and not detained by ICE. Now, a couple news outlets After a complete media blackout on the subject going into Saturday morning by the corporate press, by the left-wing corporate media, a couple of these news outlets, places like NBC, began to stick their heads up to say, oh, well, there's a perfectly good explanation for all of this. Oh, yeah? What's that? What's the perfectly good explanation for all of this? And they would say things like, oh, well, a lot of these guys have been in the country for decades. Oh, so that's a good thing? What are you trying to say to me exactly? It's a good thing that convicted murderers are still in the United States of America? They've been here for decades, they insist. This is not all under the Biden-Harris administration. It also happened under other administrations. And one of the details that they leave out as they try and make all of these many excuses for this is that the non-detained list in the United States has doubled under the Biden-Harris administration. So the number of people who ICE is now tracking who are not detained, who fall into these categories of convicted criminals, has doubled under Biden-Harris. Bill Malugin has been reporting on this with detail. And by the way, Bill Malugin, who broke this story in the first place, also gave us that detail that you claim is the fact check, CBS and NBC. Bill Malugin gave it to us early. He said people should know it's not all under the Biden-Harris administration that these numbers have been populated by. But under what circumstance should an American accept this as acceptable at all? Who cares? And we all know how much worse Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made it. It's not a mystery. We're seeing it happen before our very eyes. And we have lots of officials within the federal government who work on the border mission who say that this White House has told them not to tell the truth to the American people about the extent of the damage. That's what's really going on. And so Coringe was just asked about this by, who else? Peter Doocy. Peter Doocy wanted to know why all of these people, these murderers, are in the country. What do you have to say about this? This is how she answered.
13,000 people who have been convicted of murder crossed the border illegally and are living among us. So how much danger are U.S. communities in right now because of this?
Now, that question was entirely legitimate. 13,000 convicted murderers, illegal. How in danger are American communities? You're the White House. Give me an answer. Get ready for this.
And you're talking about the ICE data?
Yes.
So just a couple of things, and I think it's important to correct the record here. First of all, the false representation of the data ICE shared. So that was what we are seeing, false representation.
What are you talking about? That's what we were seeing? False representation?
I got to call that out. We got to call that out.
Call what out?
And it's been fact-checked by some of your colleagues
What
here.
has been
by
fact-checked?
multiple.
Has she said anything yet? Corey, am I going crazy? Did she say a single thing that was a, quote, false representation or something that was fact-checked? It's been called out by multiple news outlets. She hasn't declared a single detail in this ridiculous rebuttal. He asked her, should Americans feel safe? Should Americans feel safe in the midst of all of this? And she says, false representations and fact checks.
So that was what we are seeing, false representation. I got to call that out. We got to call that out. And it's been fact checked by some of your colleagues here, by multiple outlets that has been debunked on what has been.
What has been debunked? What kind of spokeswoman are you? What has been debunked? Speak clearly, please.
Falsely misrepresented here, so we have to call that out. And so, look,
Can you clarify what the misrepresentation is?
The numbers that is being put out about
are being put out. Numbers is a plural.
How many people are out has been falsely represented here. If you look at the total returns and removal of the past year, that has been higher than every year under the previous administration since 2010.
The illegal entries have been higher than every year since 2010.
If you look at it. And if we're going to report something, a data that's out there, we got to do
a data? If we're going to report something, a data that's out there.
It in a way that is not confusing the American people and certainly not lying.
Yeah, we'd hate to confuse everybody. You know, I wish everyone could be as clear as Coringe, so we'd all know exactly what was going on.
And so this has been fact-checked, and so this is the way that is being falsely represented here is just not okay. And
this is the way that is being falsely represented here is not okay. Put it on a coffee mug, you know. What was that last sentence? What is this?
And so this has been fact-checked, and so this is the way that is being falsely represented here is just not okay. And they'll got to be really clear about that.
She's an idiot. She's a complete idiot. Are the members of the press in any way insulted by how stupid these things are? Has anybody ever paused and they're like, hey, is there anybody who speaks English who works here? Can you send them out, please? Can I speak to your manager? You ever have one of those experiences? You're on the phone with somebody and you're just not getting anywhere. You're like, can I speak to a manager? She's not even that good. She's like the robot you talk to at the beginning of the call. Representative, you keep screaming into the phone, hoping that some human's going to answer. What was that? That was a complete disaster. And Peter Doocy asked the question perfectly in a completely defensible way. There are 13,000 people here. Why should Americans feel safe?
13,000 people who have been convicted of murder, crossed the border illegally, and are living among us. So how much danger are U.S. communities in right now?
Could it be any more clear than that? No assurances of safety. Did you hear that? The White House didn't bother to tell you that it's fine. Don't you worry. We know exactly where they are. They're not going to hurt you. We're looking out for you. I said Friday as this news was breaking, and I still stand by the fact that there should be, in a rational administration, in a real presidential administration, if news were to break that 13,000 murderers were at large in the United States of America, all foreign nationals, not American citizens, it would require a whole-of-government approach to respond to it. You'd call in all the various agencies. You'd have the FBI reporting on the latest. You'd have Immigration and Customs Enforcement telling you about their efforts to get a hold of these guys. You'd have the various banking authorities saying they're keeping track or whatever. You'd have every element you could possibly bring in to convince the American people that it's going to be okay. We're looking out for you. We're trying to resolve this and doing it rapidly. But instead, what we're getting is, no, this information has been debunked and the media said it wasn't true. And what wasn't true? What wasn't true? Go ahead. Tell us. And so the core point, the screaming headline, continues to be 100% true. That at the very least, 13,000 convicted murderers are here in the United States of America, foreign nationals. And that's not the American citizens. That's not the American citizens. I had a source write to me today point out the 2022 murders committed in the United States. You know how many murders were committed in the United States in 2022? 23,000. That's a single year. 23,000 murders were committed in 2022. And so in the data that ICE just released, they indicated that over 13,000 convicted murderers are among the foreign nationals who they're tracking in the United States, or that they're aware of. It doesn't even say that they're tracking. They're just saying, we're aware. They're non-detained. So presumably they're not tracking a lot of them. And they also had people who are currently being prosecuted for that, prosecuted for murder, for homicide. So the grand total is 14,944 people who've either been convicted or are being prosecuted for homicide. They have pending criminal charges. Compare that against the overall murders in the United States in a single calendar year, 23,000. Holy cow. And this comes from the same group who say things like, well, illegals don't commit crimes at the same level as American citizens. You hear this all the time, don't you? They constantly tell you stuff like this, which is, by the way, a way to say that Americans are not as good as foreigners. That's what they're trying to say to you. They're trying to convey to you that American citizens aren't worth crap. These illegals who are pouring across the border, you're worse than them, is the message you get back when you say something like, hey, I'm concerned about the crime that's coming with all of this open border nonsense, all of these illegal aliens who are pouring in. You know, one of the effects is crime, and I'm very concerned about that. And they'll spit in your face. They'll say, well, at least they're not Americans. Right? Am I right? This is the retort. The retort is to tell you you suck. What? I'm just asking about the safety of my community. And if you're trying to tell me we have enough problems of our own, the answer to that is you're right. We have enough problems of our own. Why would we import more? Why would that be the solution? And so once again, the White House in this, just having Karine Jean-Pierre work there is a way to show you that they have contempt for you. That's actually the truth. And you know I'm serious because I didn't call her Corinne just now. Having Karine Jean-Pierre work at the White House and convey information, a woman who is incapable of speaking in English, is a way to tell you that they don't really care what you think. It's an expression of contempt for you. The last thing you need is clarity about the behavior of your government. Instead, we're going to put this buffoon out in front of you. She won't be able to tell you anything. She'll treat you with contempt if you dare raise any serious issue that Americans really want answers to. It's a crystal clear sign of what this White House thinks of the American people. And that's both Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and people like Karine Jean-Pierre. And it's deeply unfortunate. And God willing, the voters change it in November. It's 422. All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Mark calling in for Virginia Beach right now, line 4. Mark, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, real quick. My next-door neighbor works for the Customs Border and Protection.
Okay.
And he just told me that here at Norfolk's International Terminal, they walked off at 3 o'clock today. So whatever your guest is telling you, let him know that today Norfolk is shut down.
So that's what you're hearing is that already started in Norfolk. I hadn't seen that just yet. The first indications we're really getting is that the contract for the Longshoreman runs through today and that the strikes would be expected to start tomorrow. But you say you're hearing that some of that's already begun at Norfolk.
Yeah, I was told that last week, and then this morning and now this afternoon, it's confirmed they're done.
Huh. Okay, well, we'll keep an eye open for it, Mark. Thank you. It's yeah, that's a big deal, a really big deal. In fact, Joan's calling in from Yorktown, Virginia on this on line 3. Joan, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Well, there are a couple things. There's a transition from what you were talking about in terms of the flooding catastrophe.
Yeah.
You realize how important it is to get food and goods into the country to handle the situation in the mountains and in the flooding.
Yes.
But the thing that bothers me more than anything else is that Biden has apparently said he will not invoke the Taft-Hartley law. You realize he could do that
Yes.
and shut down this strike. So I'll be interested in having your guest talk about what can be done to postpone. I think there's an 80-day period that
It is.
Biden could force them.
Yeah, he
Force
can.
them
The
to. And
Taft-Hartley Act would allow him to suspend all of this for 80 days. That is the law. You're correct about that. Here's the reality. We're 5 weeks away from an election. Biden doesn't want to upset the unions, and he's on the verge of allowing the economy to go into full-blown peril. We're in a really, really crazy situation, as you point out right now, Joan. Thank you. I've got to talk to EJ Antoni in just a moment. What's the economic impact of an East Coast port shutdown? Seems like a big deal. EJ will describe it next. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's now 4:36, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, we will be joined by Sean Logue. He's a criminal and injury attorney in Pennsylvania. But importantly, this weekend he was at Primanti Brothers, that restaurant, when the management barred J.D. Vance and his supporters from holding a gathering there. Why is that? What happened? Sean has the details for us ahead. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Always appreciate your contributions. We are waiting to see what happens at all of the ports along the East Coast beginning this evening. That's because the longshoremen who handle moving all of those containers to and from ships are threatening a strike at this hour. And President Biden is not attempting to stop it, it appears. He's broadly claiming that they have some sort of negotiation underway, and that's it. He was actually asked a question about strikes in Yemen this weekend, and here's how he answered that question.
Any comment on the strikes in Yemen, Mr. President?
Both sides have got to settle the strike. Support the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike.
I've talked to both sides. They're going to settle the strike. I'm supporting the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike. I don't think that has anything to do with Yemen. That's Joe Biden talking about this. His administration has been spectacularly bad at tackling this issue. In fact, this weekend, Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, was asked on CNBC about this, the potential of a strike by the Longshoremen. And she says, well, I haven't really been focused on that.
Where have you been kind of focused and hearing on what would happen if the strike goes, let's say, longer than a week?
Again, I have not been very focused on that.
I have not been very focused on that, she says. We're looking at damage due to that strike, should it take place. J.P. Morgan estimates between $3.8 to $4.5 billion in economic damage per day. Well, let's dive even deeper into the numbers now with EJ Antoni. He's economist at the Heritage Foundation and the in-house economist of this show, the Vince Coglianese Show. EJ, good to have you back with us, sir.
Vince, great to be back. Thanks for having me again.
This is not a small deal, is it?
No, not at all. And, that estimate that you just read out from J.P. Morgan, that's accurate, but only, frankly, for a few days. The problem is that the longer this goes on, Vince, it will exponentially build. People think, well, let's say ports are shut down a day, then we're going to have a backlog of a day worth of imports and exports. No, it builds, and pretty significantly. And so you very quickly get to a point where adding each additional day to a strike like this can add a week of delays worth in terms of imports and exports entering and leaving this country. And I mean, frankly, this is the same Secretary of Commerce that we just heard that clip from when she was asked about the massive downward revision of over 800,000 jobs to the nation's economy recently. She simply responded by saying, oh, I'm just, not familiar with that data. If she's not familiar with data on jobs and she's not focused on commerce, what is our Commerce Secretary even doing?
Well, yet another cabinet official who deserves to be fired, quite obviously, given answers like that. I do see some of the numbers here, and they're staggering. You mentioned, of course, the second-order effects of a strike and how much that'll disrupt the nation's supplies coming in. We're talking 45,000 workers who could all of a sudden all go on strike, 36 ports up and down the eastern seaboard, and 40% of all containerized goods in the United States. This will have a deep impact. It seems like even beyond what we experienced during COVID, EJ.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where I think people really underestimate just how reliant we have become on things like intermodal transport. So that's where you have these containers that can easily be loaded onto ships and then put on a truck or put on a train. And you can go around the world in these things without having to actually transfer all of the cargo from container to container to container. So it really has streamlined things. But now what this union is essentially doing is they're going to choose this single point of failure to really cripple America's international trade, at least when it comes to the East Coast ports on the Atlantic and on the Gulf.
And the West Coast ports are separate, correct? The West Coast ports have different representation. They're not affected by this.
Right, but what a lot of people have questioned is why can't we just ship everything in and out of the West Coast ports? I mean, those are just as clogged as the East Coast ones are. You can't simply just transfer all of that traffic. And there are also other logistical issues, like with the Panama Canal, for example. But even if that wasn't the case, we don't even have the rail infrastructure, for example, to transfer all of that traffic to the West Coast and then ship it all east.
All right, let me play some audio for you here. This is Harold Daggett. He's the head negotiator for the International Longshoreman Association. And he announced recently he's definitely playing hardball.
Everybody went to work during COVID. Nobody stayed home. Well, I want to be compensated for that. I'm not asking for the world. They know what I want. They know what I want. And if they don't, well, then I have to go into the street and we have to fight for what we rightfully deserve. These people today don't know what a strike is. Right. When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's going to happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, Malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are.
EJ Antoni, is Harold Daggett accurately describing the economic turmoil that will come?
I think that's pretty close, Vince. Yeah, unfortunately. And you know what? This is actually something that I think longtime listeners of your show kind of would have probably seen coming, because we talked about this back in October of 2021 when we were talking about the Biden-Harris administration, the massive amount of spending that they were doing just in the first half year of their administration, and all of the inflation it was going to cause and the subsequent strikes that were going to happen because of that. And then a couple of years after that, in October of 2023, we were talking again about the United Auto Workers Union. That at the time was the largest auto strike in American history. And it's all because these laborers are essentially demanding higher wages because of the massive cost of living increase that we have seen over the last several years. And this is very, very common whenever you have these periods of very high and very rapid inflation. Workers are very upset about the fact that they can no longer make ends meet, about the fact that they may be making more, but their paycheck buys less than it used to. And the individual worker may not have a lot of bargaining power, but when you have collective bargaining power, as is the case of these unions, that's where you really start to see the wage pressure ramp up.
So I'm looking at some of the numbers here, and it strikes me that the longshoremen, by and large, seem to be pretty well paid by comparison to most American jobs. They say longshoreman income can, on an annual basis, exceed $200,000 a year. Longshoremen, under the current contract that expires today, earn about $39 an hour at their top rate. The Longshoreman Association wants a $5 an hour raise for each of the next 6 years, which will put them at $69 at the top rate per hour in the final year of the contract. So they're making some big asks here, but it looks like the longshoremen do kind of have a legitimate labor monopoly going on the East Coast.
They certainly do, absolutely. And, those types of monopolies are one of the reasons why, government can step in and say, no, you're going back to work and everyone's going back to the negotiating table, at least for a limited period of time. But I don't want to, going back to something we said earlier, I don't want to just make it seem like all these guys want, at least leadership, all they want is simply cost of living increases. There are also some pretty crazy demands that leadership is making, which frankly, I don't think are really serving the best interests of the members here. One of the things is this incredible resistance to automation. And at first you may say, well, of course, resist automation because that'll eliminate jobs. Sure, it eliminates certain jobs, but it also creates others. There was a lot of resistance, for example, when they started automating toll booths. Well, guess what happened after that? Instead of having to sit in these booths, which were not climate controlled, where these toll workers were breathing car exhaust all day, making change for people, working literally 24 hours a day. Now we have, in most states, a system where it's all electronic, and a lot of those folks ended up getting jobs simply doing things like answering phones in an air-conditioned office, essentially handling help requests from people with their Easy Pass or whatever electronic tolling system it may be. So far from eliminating these people's jobs, it actually ended up giving them better ones.
So I'm going to play one more piece of audio from Harold Daggett, and then I want to talk about Joe Biden's role in all of this, because you alluded to it a moment ago. Here's one more from Harold Daggett. Again, he's the chief negotiator, the president of the International Longshoremen's Association. He says that Joe Biden has now been screaming at him. I haven't heard Joe Biden. I guess Biden does scream occasionally. He'll just scream and then I'll go back to whispering. It's kind of crazy. So I guess Harold Daggett experienced one of the screaming moments.
Now I have the president screaming at me. I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are going to go to work on that pier? It's going to cost the companies money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
I will cripple you. You have no idea what that means. This guy, unbelievable. So that's who's staring down Joe Biden right now, telling him, go ahead, invoke Taft-Hartley. Now let's talk about Biden for a moment, EJ Antoni. The Taft-Hartley Act will allow Biden to force everybody back to work for a period of 80 days. Is that right?
Right, exactly. But this is really just a Band-Aid. It's not something that is going to, I think, ultimately solve the problem here, unfortunately. And it's very similar to when we had the big rail strike not that long ago. That was just 2 years ago, right? And we saw the government intervene essentially to stop that and prevent what would have been an even more massive economic and even more massive amount of economic harm, because that would have shut down not just simply freight entering and exiting the East Coast ports, but freight moving essentially nationwide. I mean, unfortunately, we really are in a bit of a no-win situation here. I think we're probably going to ultimately see, some kind of bargain where the ports are not going to get everything they want, the union is not going to get everything they want, and unfortunately, the American taxpayer, right, the American consumer is going to be the one holding the bag and paying for these higher costs.
So I want to just explore the politics of this, and I know you're doing the economics of all of this. But there are some interesting things going on. One of them is that Biden is trying to curry favor with the unions and make himself seem like Lunch Bucket Joe. He's in an impossible political situation here, because if he lets this go through and a strike takes place, you're looking at complete economic turmoil ahead of the election. And then simultaneously, if he calls off the strike by invoking Taft-Hartley, well, then he's betraying the unions that he claims to be in the corner of. The unions themselves, the Longshoremen are an affiliate of the AFL-CIO, and the AFL-CIO has openly endorsed Kamala Harris for president already. So what I'm looking at here, EJ Antoni, is a very messy political environment, and I'm still waiting to hear what President Trump is going to say on this subject, because he's obviously going to have an immense amount of interest in getting everything back on track.
Yeah, Vince, I think that's absolutely right. And one of the really interesting things here that you're alluding to is the fact that we are so close to this election. And essentially, you're looking at a situation where if Biden does go all in for the unions and essentially lets the strike go forward, then 4 weeks from now, when we're right before the election, you will have consumers at that point being unable to buy a lot of the things that they're used to being able to just run to the store and grab really easy, or they're used to be able to just buy it with one click on like Amazon.com or whatever the case may be. So I don't think there really is a way for Biden to square the circle right now. And if we just look at it from a numbers perspective, the polling in terms of union members, not the leadership, I don't care about them, but the actual hardworking union members, their approval rating of this administration is pretty lousy, and they like Trump much more than they have liked any Republican in literally decades. That's not an exaggeration. So again, I just don't think there's a way for Biden to square this circle right now.
Yeah, and this is quite obviously why the union contract runs through today. That's why. I mean, if you were to schedule this thing, you try and schedule it right up against a major presidential election so that you have the most possible bargaining power heading into those final weeks ahead of the election. And now we're seeing the fruits of that effort to set the contract for this very timeline. Well, we'll keep tracking it. EJ Antoni, we'll talk to you again, as we always do, on the state of the economy. Thank you, sir. Okay, let's go to the phones. I've got John calling in from La Plata, Maryland, line 1. Hello, John. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. What's going on?
I'm doing well, John. What's on your mind?
Oh, it was a great time on the boat parade yesterday. I was the guy on the old bow rider with the giant flags on it.
Oh, I saw photos of you. I saw some very good photos of you. You had a lot of Trump flags, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. What's really cool is when I fly the big ones off my motorcycle. I was at the Wilkes-Barre rally a couple weeks ago, and I was the one riding in with that 10-foot by 10-foot never surrender on the back of my motorcycle.
On the back of a motorcycle, you had a 10 by 10 flag?
Yeah, the same big flag that was on my boat, I was flying it off my motorcycle when I rode into the Wilkes-Barre rally.
Is it hard to ride with a 10-foot by 10-foot flag on the back of your motorcycle? Does it shake the bike at all, or is it fine?
I mean, I wouldn't try going too fast. I mean, for what I was doing with it, I don't think I was going much over 10 or 15 miles an hour. But, yeah, it would get stupid if I tried to do a lap of the Beltway with it.
Okay, all right, I was just making sure. I just want you to stay safe out there, John. Yeah, I heard it was a great time. I know there was a little bit of weather yesterday, but it's great to see all these boats showing up on the Potomac. People noticed. I saw all sorts of social media posts. Hey, there's a Trump boat parade going on in the middle of the Potomac. It's a big deal. Thanks, John, for being out there. That's cool. Corey was telling me all about it. I missed it yesterday. I had some family obligations, but I was getting reports. Don't you worry. I FaceTimed in. I was checking in on everything. All right, stay with us. Coming up, Sean Logue is with us. He was in Pittsburgh this weekend at Primanti Brothers. That's the restaurant that rejected J.D. Vance and his supporters. The truth about what went down. That's next.